All right. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Making sure. Um, we are going to be talking about visualizing complete streets within PTV Vissim. Um, and through this webinar, what we're going to be doing is talking about different elements that we can use within PTV Vissim to show various elements of complete streets. This isn't necessarily a webinar on what those elements are or the validity of any element over the other or anything like that. So it's mostly just talking about how to implement these things within VSIM for visualization purposes so that you can create recordings and show what is going on with your proposed designs and things like that. So to get started, we're going to be talking about a few different things within this next hour, starting with the lane graphic features. There are some new lane graphic features. There are also some old ones, and I just kind of want to highlight all of them to show how we can make our roadways look a little bit better and decent than just kind of gray squares. Next, we're going to be talking about 3D traffic signals, how to utilize those to show some of the infrastructure that would be implemented. A lot of times with these treatments, there are going to be different types of signals. There are going to be various layouts of the intersections. It'll be good to be able to show those in a 3D rendering. Then we're going to be talking about how to use pedestrian areas and obstacles. Even if you don't have VisWalk, you can still utilize these features within VSIM. The models I'm going to be showing have VisWalk pedestrians walking around, but you can still use the areas and obstacles as various curbs and medians and things like that and give them textures to kind of spruce up your model a bit. Then we'll be talking about 3D information signs and how to utilize those to, again, add some custom signage and relay information within the network. And then finally, a little bonus at the end is we're going to be talking about how to implement flashing signals within VSIM. We get these questions a lot about how do we implement like a flashing red at a hawk beacon, or how do we do a flashing yellow arrow or something like that. And so I'm going to be showing how we can visualize those things while maintaining the integrity of the driver behaviors in the background. So to start, there are some key elements within a complete street, right? And looking at a few different resources, they all kind of have similar things. And those key elements within a complete street include sidewalks, transit, biking, bike lanes, protected crossings, greenways, those kinds of things. So in particular, with the travel lanes, we're looking at limiting the number of passenger car lanes. This helps with the pedestrian crossings as well as conflicts between passenger cars and other modes of transportation. Usually, we're talking about dedicated bike lanes at minimum, if not completely protected bike lanes that are median separated or something like that. With the pedestrian crossings, right, we're looking at the crosswalks being shortened so that those time in the street is reduced by as much as possible, and granting ease of access and visibility to the pedestrians. They're also usually protected by various curbs and barriers and things like that. And then finally, transit access. So we're going to be looking at dedicated bus lanes, protected bus stops that are separated from the passenger car travel lanes by a median, and then also looking at placement of these stops nearby to local crossings and things like that. The first element I want to show is just a rendering that I put together within VSIM of a proposed complete street. This was a 4-lane, or technically a 5-lane road with a 2-way left turn lane down the middle. And you can see that we have a transit travel lane. We've reduced the pedestrian or the passenger car travel lanes down to 2 travel lanes, and then we've implemented a cycle track on the right side of the screen there. So what we're going to be doing is talking about how we can put in these various elements, both or mostly on the visual side, how to incorporate, these textures, these lane markings and medians and 3D infrastructure and things like that, so that you can build out renderings like this one to for public review or to increase awareness about what projects are coming up in the local area. So let me go on to there we go. All right, so the first features we're going to be talking about are the lane features, the lane graphic features. And these are going to include 3 key elements: the display types, the lane markings, and the pavement markings. So the display types have been around in Vissim for a long time, but I want to highlight how you can import textures, you can change colors and things like that. And one of the newer features, it's not brand new, but it's been around in the most recent couple of versions, is you can actually add display types to specific lanes now. So you can create a curb or a transit lane with a different color, or a bike lane with a different color, to really highlight what those elements you're going to be using. Now, out in the field, it is becoming more common to paint a transit lane red or to paint a bike lane green to increase visibility and awareness. But even if that's not going to be the proposed solution, maybe you're adding a transit lane and not painting it, even within the visualization, it might be good to add those graphics so that it's easier to kind of see what's going on. Then we're going to talk about lane marking types. This is a newer feature in Vissim, how you can add in different lane markings. So you can change the colors, you can change the dash length, things like that. And because of that, you might want to consider adding additional lanes so that you can bring in those lane marking types, like a curb side lane or a shoulder lane or something. And then finally, with the pavement markings, we've had pavement markings for a long time, but one of the newer features we have is that you can bring in custom pavement markings to increase readability. Maybe you're putting wayfinding down or modal imagery down on the lanes to help improve adherence to the various elements. So to start, let's look at the graphic displays that we're going to be doing with the display types. So here we see I've created a few custom display types. We have the road gray that I've edited to have a black texture, so it has an actual asphalty kind of texture. I've also included an invisible display type so that we can turn certain elements off, or if there's certain lanes or links that are kind of graphically not looking so good, you can turn them invisible. Bike lanes we've made green. I've created a curb lane, a crosswalk display type, a transit lane, and a median display type as well, so that we can really distinguish between the various elements, right? Because otherwise, all of these things in Vissim are typically the same, kind of dark gray color, and it can be kind of hard to visually see what's going on. So you can add display types at the link level, but you can also add them at the lane level. And so that's going to be really helpful moving forward on your future projects to really display what's going on with the various elements. Then we're going to look at the lane marking types. So with the lane marking types, you can see that we have various dashes and solid lines. What this usually will mean is that you're going to be adding additional lanes that aren't going to be used as travel lanes. So for example, we look at the crosswalks here, right? Traditionally, what you would do is you'd add in a single crosswalk link across the road and define it as a pedestrian. Or if you're not using VisWalk, you would add in 2 one-way links going in either direction, or one one-way link in either direction. But now if you make those 2 lane links and make one of the lanes 1 foot wide, you can put in a custom lane marking type. So you can then include that solid stripe down the side, or like we have with the center lines here. With the normal travel lanes, typically this roadway would be drawn as 2 one-way links. But I've made them 3 lanes, and I've put 2-foot shoulders on either side, and then that way we could create those custom lane marking types. You can see we've included some dashes as well. Here you can see how that's kind of laid out. So on the lane configuration, right, we have the center lane being 10 foot, and then I have the two shoulder lanes. And then on the right side lane, lane 1, I've added a gray curb color as well to kind of distinguish it as the edge of the roadway. And you can see in the third column, we have the marking type. So I have a solid white and a solid yellow color. And these work independently from the no lane change option. So even if you turn on and allow lane changes, so for example, if you're thinking of like, kind of moving away from complete streets onto like a freeway, you might have like a solid white line or something like that cars can still cross over. Well, you can visualize a solid white line while allowing lane changes. Whereas in the past, the only way to get a solid white line would be to limit lane changes. You can also use the lane markings to create things like medians or gore points, right? So if connectors are coming together, this middle image, for example, I've used a U-turn link. So we have a southbound roadway and then kind of a northbound roadway, and I've used a link that turns that corner, and it's a 2-lane connector with a curbside lane, so we can create that visualization. I've also, and I'll show you this in the model when we get into the model here in a second, but I've also been able to visualize 2-way left turn lanes. We get a lot of questions about 2-way left turn lanes and turn pocket visualizations and things like that, and so we can implement those with these graphic parameters. So before I move on to pavement markings, I'm going to quickly jump over into my sample project that we got going. So here is the existing conditions of that location that we saw in the video. So if I quickly pop back and forth out of 3D, so the buildings show up. Here we have a large hospital, and then in front of that hospital, here's the main entrance to the hospital, and then we have a 5-lane roadway with a median in the middle, and then another large intersection with some bike lanes over here. Now across this street are other medical facilities. There's a couple clinics and things like that across the street. And so there's a lot of pedestrian traffic that would need to cross the street occasionally. And the only 2 access points are at these 2 intersections on opposite ends. There's not really good access in the middle. And then we also see that there's a bus stop here in the kind of in the middle of the block. Now the main emergency entrance is right here. So the thought would be, okay, how do we increase access to the front of this hospital, right? There are obviously parking lots on the other side of the street, but there are parking lots and things over here as well. So people might need to cross the street, without having to walk all the way down and around. So to start, let's look at some of the display types that I've used, as well as some of the custom lane markings. So if we come to an intersection, you can see here that if I zoom in, you can see that we used a texture on the pavement, so you can see what it looks like. And then here are those crosswalk lane markings. Typically, crosswalks in Vissim have been shown with the striping, the zebra striping pavement markings. But in a lot of places, you're using these double white lines to visualize that. And so this is just kind of more accurate to what's going on within the actual network. And if I switch over to 2D mode, you can see what the underlying actual aerial infrastructure looks like. So if I turn my links off real quick, you can kind of see how it's laid out here. And I've tried my best to kind of keep it as close as possible to that. So you can see yellow lines, you can see the white lines. And on some links, you can even put in a custom lane marking type that is none. So you can basically make the lane markings invisible. So while we look at this particular link right here, it is a 3-lane link, but we have an invisible lane divider. If I move farther down the road, you can see here we have a 2-way left turn lane. And so all we've done here is each one of these links is a 4-lane link. We have the 2 travel lanes, the shoulder lane, and then the center lane. And then we just overlap the 2 center lanes in either direction. And now we have our 2-way left turn lane. So those are some ways that you can utilize those lane marking types. And moving forward, that can make your visualization look a lot better. Right. So jumping back into the PowerPoint, the next thing I want to talk about are some pavement marking graphics. So we have the traditional arrows and stripes for the crosswalks, but I also want to point out these custom imagery and model text that you can put in. So with the lane markings, you can drop in various custom images. We have some pre-built into Vissim. So if I jump back into Vissim, right, we have the arrows are pre-built in. If I jump over to my complete streets example scenario, right, we have some bicycles, we have some bus words and things like that. So when you go to drop in a pavement marking now, what you'll see is an additional option for user-defined pavement marking. And so you just click on the big black box right here. And here are the pre-built ones that we have. And they're kind of hard to see because they're like white images on kind of a white background. But we have some various pre-built ones in here. But you can always import your own images, right? You can see these are just PNGs. So that's all you really need to, that's the image type that you need to bring in. But as long as it's white on a clear background, then you can bring it in and put it into your model. And so you can create those in like a Word document or in an image software or something like that. All right. The next element I want to talk about are the 3D traffic signals. So 3D traffic signals have been around for a long time within Vissim. A lot of times the common feedback I get is it just takes a long time to set them up. So people just choose not to do it, or it's not really worth the effort or something like that. But I wanna kind of push back on that because all of these elements I added in, fairly quickly, and so it didn't take too long to set these things up, and they can really add a lot to the readability of a model. In particular, with the 3D traffic signals, we have the traditional signals, so they will time and they will change in accordance with the signal controller. But we also can add signs, signage, and other things like that. So if I go back into, or if I go to the next slide, you can see here, this is what a proposed update to that intersection would look like with bike lanes and then protected bike crossings, right? We can see the standard infrastructure here. We have the masts, we have the arms, we have the signals. We even have some signage, and you can actually bring in custom signage that would match what would actually be on those posts. Here's a pedestrian beacon, right? So a hawk beacon. I didn't bring in all the signage for the hawk beacon, but you can see that we have the signals here. We have the various masts, and so you can utilize these to validate sight lines and things like that. Visibility of the actual signs or displays that you need. And then you can also add in custom signage. So here we have, a median image. We have a 35-mile-per-hour image on the side over there, right? So you can add in some custom signage to kind of spruce up your model as well. And again, try and make it look a little bit better, because in the past, it was common practice to like export Vissim trajectories to third-party rendering, right? And so the idea here would be that, okay, if you can do a little extra work within Vissim, you don't have to do that. You can do it all kind of thing. So before I move on to the next poll question, let me jump back into Vissim and show you some of those 3D traffic signals. So if I go back to my existing conditions model, this is in 3D, this is what our intersection in front of the hospital would look like over here, right? So we have our standard, 8-phase intersection, and then some of them have protected and permissive modes, right? So here we have our masts, we have our pedestrian signals, we have our vehicular signals, We even brought in some signs, left turn yield on green, right? So if you're proposing a new intersection or update to an intersection, right, it might come with certain signage and things like that. And so having renderings of it might be helpful so that people can see kind of what's going on with that. I'm going to talk about these road signs in a little bit, but I just wanted to show how these actually work. And then if I run a simulation, and this is the sketchy part during a live presentation, right? Always hitting play. You never know what's going to happen. But you can see how they actually actuate as well. The lights will change colors. We have the pedestrian signals changing. Here we have the permissive phase. We would see the protected phase, right? So you can set up the various signals so they actually follow what the intersection is doing. Okay. And then down the road, I've also implemented some street lights just to kind of make it look a little bit better. Here is that median sign. You can bring that in. You can bring in some warning signs as well. Just to kind of see how different signage would look, what the sight lines are, what the visibility are. I didn't take the step to bring in actual trees, but you could also bring in static 3D models for trees and things like that. Okay. We're going to go into talking about some of the VisWalk components, how we can utilize these components to help visualize sidewalks and curbs and things like that. But a third use that I end up using a lot, and I know Sean's used it a lot as well, is using pedestrian areas as masks, right? So when you built in Vissim, right, you have your various lanes going through the intersection and things like that. And if you add a custom texture, it can look really good on that lane, but then you have these weird gaps and stuff where the lanes aren't covering the background map and stuff like that. So again, even if you don't have VisWalk, you can utilize the pedestrian areas or obstacles as just generic 3D geometry, right? So you can create a carpet essentially of asphalt that you can lay down in the middle of your intersection, so it's a nice consistent color. Or if you're going to add in a median or a curb or something like that. So here we're looking at bike lanes at an intersection where they dwell on the corner rather than within the vehicular travel lane, and they are curb separated, right? So here you can add in obstacles as curbs. You can add in obstacles as 3D medians. The vehicles don't interact with these objects, but visually they can really help key in on what's going on in the model. So I'm going to jump over into Vissim one more time to show how I implemented some of that, right? So in our existing conditions model, without any of the improvements, I have sidewalks that I coded in as pedestrian areas. I also have center median that I coded in as a pedestrian obstacle. And so on the existing conditions, really that's all I did. I didn't really need to put in, I could have put in a mask, I chose not to. And then here I also put in an obstacle as like a green strip, right? And I threw a texture on it, so that way it kind of looks like grass. In hindsight though, putting a green texture right next to a bike lane can be kind of visually confusing, so I might change this to like a dirt texture in the future. But if I go to we have our bike lanes proposal, for example. So I'm going to switch over to that one. And here we have our bike lanes, and normally those bike lanes would follow just in line with traffic, right? So they're just striping is the only separation. But as you get closer to the intersection, one of the treatments that you will do is to separate that bike lane from the flow of traffic. So that way you're pulling the bikes off of the flow of traffic, and then they're dwelling on the corners for increased visibility and safety. And part of that is that you're going to be adding in curbs. So here we can visualize the curbs with obstacles, right? We put gaps in the curbs for the pedestrian and bicycle crossing links. Now, again, the bicycles don't interact with these curbs. from a behavioral perspective, but visually it could really help show kind of what's going on. So if I run the simulation real quick, we can see the cars coming up. There can be some bicycles coming eventually. Here we have a bike waiting at the curb to cross the street, and then now they're waiting over here to cross the street as well, right? So again, it can really add something to the model to utilize these 3D spaces. If I go into my complete streets model, I've utilized these even more. So here I have a two-way bike lane with those protected curbs. And I realized that the gray texture kind of looked too similar to the sidewalks. So I changed it to more of like a tan texture just so it stands out a bit more. And so everywhere you see one of these tan structures is a median, right? And so, we have our pedestrian crossing here, and you can actually see kind of how the curbs might be set up, where you have the little dog leg in the median so that, you can get more pedestrian storage and wait times and stuff. So yeah, utilizing pedestrian areas and obstacles as additional 3D features, even if you don't have the VisWalk element in your license. The next item that we're going to look at are 3D informational signs. So these are a newer feature. I think they came out like 2 or 3 versions ago. Their primary purpose is to display evaluation data and static data about objects within the network. So a 3D informational sign can show you various attributes of objects, so like the name or the number of an object. It could show you the status of an object. So if you want to look at the detection state of a detector, right? You can see whether a detector's been tricked or not. You can look at evaluation outputs, so travel times. If you have variable message displays, you can utilize those. From a complete streets perspective, we can use it for street names, custom wayfinding, other custom sign text, and things like that. And so from there, we can look into, we can add in these elements. I did see a question coming in asking, are we going to get into the models in detail? Yeah, I just wanted to show you the various different elements kind of at a broad stroke, and then we'll kind of poke around in the specific models. So with the 3D information signs, in this model primarily, I use them as street signs and then also to call out specific locations. So for example, the big gray mass next to the street, I wanted to call out that that was a hospital and that there's an emergency group there. So I put up an emergency sign as well. You can add custom text to these, so it makes it really easy so you don't have to find or create an image and then import the image as a sign. You can just type whatever you need to type. Okay, so before I move on to my third poll question, I'm going to jump back into Vissim, and I'm going to show in the existing conditions those custom street signs, and then I'm going to kind of go through all these elements in a little bit more detail. And we're going to sit in Vissim for a couple minutes and look at these. So as we're at this intersection, we can see, Barnett Road. This looks like it's on the signal mast, but it is just a 3D information sign that I can type in a custom text onto. We have Murphy Road over here. If I switch back out of 3D and back into 3D, you can see, we have the emergency sign. You can just, again, type that text in and format the colors and size and all of that. So now that we've kind of covered the basic elements, right? We've looked at display types, lane marking types, things like that. Let's actually jump into 2D mode and take a look at how these elements are actually laid out, right? So how do we create these various elements? I'm not going to create them in real time, but I want to show you the various objects and how the settings are set up. So to start with the display types and lane marking types, that one's pretty straightforward. So here we have an approach to an intersection. Typically, your approach to this intersection would just be a 3-lane link. And since the turn pocket goes from the stop bar all the way back to here, right, that link would probably be about 175 feet long. What I've gone ahead and done for this turnpike, or for this approach, is I've actually added an additional lane to the right and given it a custom display type called curb. By doing this, if I turn off the areas just real quick so we can see it a little bit better, right, we have this additional lane here, and that gives us the ability to add in a custom lane marking type. So we can go into the base data menu, and down at the very bottom, this is where we add in our custom display types. And just below that is where we can add in our custom lane marking type. So if you have a display type, like you want to change the road texture, typically we have this road gray, you can just double click on it and it popped up somewhere. It's over here. There we go. And you can add a custom texture, you can change the colors, things like that. Same thing goes for the lane marking types. Go to base data, come down to lane marking types. Now in a new Vissim model, we have 7 or 8 default ones. This model that I was utilizing, I was originally created before Vissim 2023. So it didn't come with the custom lane marking types. So here, I created some just specifically for this model, but there will be both solid and dashed ones. And here you can adjust the line width, you can adjust the actual line, the length, and the gaps in between. So the standard one, right, we have a dash of 10 feet and a gap length of 15 feet. And then I've created a smaller dash one that with gaps of 5 and length of 5. And then we have none. So I zero out the line length, and that's how we get this empty line here. If you want the lines to change mid-link, you will have to split the link. So I can't draw one link and then have it go from no line to a solid line. You'd have to split it in the middle. So that's why here I have my 4-lane link with the 2-way left turn kind of set up. And then I have my solid white line approach. And then in between, this is just a connector. And you can do the same thing with the lane marking types on connectors. One thing I want to point out, though, is we have this solid white line on the link into the left turn lane, but there is lane changes allowed. So even though I have a lane marking type solid, I do not have these boxes checked. And so by not checking these boxes, it allows cars to still utilize that lane, and they can still merge in and out of that lane. For a center line, right? So on this link going this way, I did the same thing. I just also added a curb lane on the other side. So I have a median side lane and then a curb side lane over here. I don't have a custom texture for the median, but I do have a custom lane marking type called yellow solid. And this one I did block lane changes because I don't want people moving into the median. If I move down to my 2-way left turn lane, we can see to get the 2-way left turn lane striping, right, we need a solid yellow line and dashes. So what I did was I created a median side lane that would represent that 2-way left turn lane. I have a yellow lane divider, and then I check one of the boxes. So if I check both boxes, it becomes a solid yellow line. If I check one of the boxes, it becomes a dashed line. Now, what we don't want is cars to make lane changes in. So by having this box on the left checked, cars will not cross that line to get in there. But just for safety purposes, I also block the lane to all vehicle types. So that's how you can utilize some of those lane stripings. Let's move into the custom or into my complete streets example where I have some more lane stripings that we can show. So if we move on to something like this section, right? This looks like there's a lot going on, but really we have a 2-lane bike link here that I split in the middle. And then in the middle, I just changed the marking type to dash. That's all I did. So I originally drew this link going down the entire block, and then whenever it crossed the driveway, I split it, changed the marking type to dashed, and that's all I had to do. I did that in both directions. Now, To get a single lane divider like this, I have a 2-lane link going eastbound and I have a 3-lane link going westbound. So I have my curbside lane, so I can get that solid white line on the curb. And I have my travel lane for the bicycles. And then I just have a dummy lane on the left side so that I can get my dashed lane marking type. And so this is technically a 3-lane lane. Now again, those curbside and median side lanes are blocked to all vehicles, so nobody's going to be utilizing them in the actual simulation. Same thing goes for our travel lane, right? So this was a single link that had 3 lanes going all the way across the block. And so I just, I have a solid white on one side and a solid yellow on the other side, and then blocked vehicle classes. And then I just split it at the intersection. And by splitting it at the intersection, I can then, on this connector in the middle, I can change it from a solid white line to a dashed white line. So when I go into 3D mode and look at that link, we get this dashed line at the intersection. All right. I also made sure to keep the curb lanes on the minor streets as well, so that if you have any right turn movements, right, that curb will continue around, and that can really make your intersection a lot more appealing, because you get that white line and you can kind of better see the footprint of the intersection. You can also utilize these lane marking types if you have like a dual left turn lane or something like that, and you need those dashes down the middle. Okay, for the 3D traffic signals, these are an object type in our object list, 3D traffic signals. And what you'll do is you will place a mast down at the corner of the street, wherever the mast is in your network, right? So here, if we look at the aerial imagery, you can actually see it on the aerial imagery right there. And so you've just placed the mast down, and you'll initially start with just the mast. So you need to define the mast. Then you can add arms to it. You can add a street light to it. You can add signals and signs directly to the mast. If you add an arm, then you can add those same elements to the arm directly. And sorry, this window is really, might be easier to see. And these signals are tied to specific signal groups within Vissim. The vehicles in Vissim don't actually pay attention to these signals. There are still signal heads on the lane that the cars are actually paying attention to. These are just visual components. If you have something like a street sign that's labeling a street, though, you could, on the signal mast, if I double click on this, you could add a sign to the mast. But when you add a sign, you need to bring in a custom texture. And so, for example, for this sign, I just found an image of this, saved it, and then imported it as a texture right here. But I don't want to do that for every street sign. That's why you see these little eye symbols. These are 3D information signs. And so what you can do is you assign these to an object. So I just assigned it to the mast itself. You can see it's kind of tied to the mast with this yellow dashed line. And then on that 3D information sign, when you place it, you can specify what you want it to display. And so the contents here, I just chose, when you hit this plus button, you can choose a text value. You can pick specific attributes or attribute values. So if you're just doing something like a road sign, you just use a text, and then you can just type in whatever text you want. And then you configure the size of the text, the color of the background, the color of the text, and the orientation. And that's how you can set up those 3D road signs on the network. As far as the curbs go, I usually do these last. So what I did first on an intersection like this one, or if we go to the other bike lane example that I have, right, it also has curbs. What I did first was set up all of the link infrastructure. And then after the link infrastructure was all set up, so I have my bike lane, and then I have an exclusive link for that bike as it's turning the corner, and then connectors to connect them to the bike lane. Then we have crosswalks for the bikes specifically, and I connected those with connectors here. So they're all connecting to this curbside lane that is independent from the actual right turn lane itself. After I defined that though, I then came back and added in just a pedestrian area or an obstacle, right? So in this case, I used the pedestrian obstacle, and you can just manually define that geometry. The cool thing about the pedestrian areas and obstacles though, is you can import them using a shapefile. So if you have a shapefile or a CAD file of your street network, and it has the curbs laid out on there, you have a layer for curbs and a layer for sidewalks and things like that, you can import those and Vissim will draw it out for you. So that will help there as well. Okay. The last element I want to talk about are attribute modifications. And the reason I want to talk about this is because I get a lot of questions about flashing signals through support or email or something like that. So attribute modifications allow you to do custom calculations and things like that. In particular, though, how it pertains to this is you can utilize these in conjunction with 3D informational signs to post variable message displays. Like at the bus stop, if you have an estimated time of arrival or something like that, you can have an attribute that stores that information, and then an attribute modification that keeps calling that information or updating it or calculating it. The other thing you can do is you can use attribute modifications to kind of hijack a signal in visualization. So how I'm going to outline that is I first want to show a video. So here's a hawk beacon. We're going to get into this model here in a second. So you have a traditional hawk beacon. They push the button and then goes flashing yellow and then solid red. And then it goes back to a flashing red and then back to off, right? This is how the hawk beacon should be set up. But in Vissim, we have our standard pedestrian crossing. When we have our standard pedestrian crossing, the next one, this is what a hawk beacon's kind of sequence should look like, right? So starting with it's off, and then upon activation, it goes flashing for a minute and then solid yellow, and then it goes to solid red while the pedestrians are in the crosswalk. Then it goes back to flashing red in this case after the clearance is done, and then it goes back to dark once everything is turned off. Now, if you've ever used the pedestrian crossing beacon that we have, it has 4 states, right? It has a green state, a red state, an amber state, and then a red amber state. So usually what that means, it goes, on your standard traffic signal, it goes green, amber, red, and then it goes back to amber and then back to green. Those are the 4 states that we have. Now, at something like a pedestrian beacon, how do we replicate that? Well, if we look functionally and behaviorally, how the vehicles and pedestrians interact with it is that the green state is this off state. So if this is off, that means go. So green, the cars will go. And then we have the amber state. The amber state is, warning, you're about to go red. So that would be our flashing yellow. So that's pretty consistent with what we have. And then we have our solid red, which matches with our red. And that would be during the green and clearance interval of the pedestrian spaces. And then the flashing red, this is after the pedestrians are cleared, before it goes back to off. It's kind of another warning state, right? And in Vissim, we call that the red amber state. So it's the amber after the red, before it goes back to green. And so you can configure these timings on the pedestrian beacon. But within Vissim, by default, they show as green, amber, red, and green, as opposed to off, yellow, flashing, red, solid, red flashing, right? So how do we implement that in Vissim? Well, we do it with attribute modification. And in this case, we'll need to do it with 2 different attribute modifications. The first one being a flashing yellow attribute modification. And in Vissim, every signal has a state number. And not to go through all of them, but here they are. There's 11 different states that a signal group can have. And so basically what we want to do is we want to use this attribute modification to say, hey, if the signal is pushing out an amber state, we want it to flash amber instead. We have a flashing amber option, but it's not in the pedestrian beacon. So we need to kind of hijack it, right? So we have some logic that says, all right, if the state is 4, then show it as 7. So that way it's actually flashing. And so we have a dummy phase. So these aren't actually being paid attention to by the vehicles, but they're being utilized on that 3D display. Same thing for the flashing red. So instead of using our red amber state where it shows an amber bulb again, we can flash red. So if the state is 2, if the signal controller is saying push out 2, we can kind of intercept that message and say, no, actually push out an 8 instead. And so you can utilize just 2 simple attribute modifications to create these pedestrian beacons. So before I move on to our final poll question, I'm going to show that in Vissim. So I'm going to pop open my hawk beacon example. And here we have just a simple pedestrian crossing, right? And we used this ped crossing button to just drag and drop a signal on top of it. Now, what that gives us is that gives us a pedestrian signal that looks like this. Oh, not that one. Over here. And so you can define your signal groups here. It usually comes with these 2 signal groups, one for the vehicle, one for the pedestrian. And you just define the timings for how long those flashings are going and things like that. What you'll need to do is add in 2 additional placeholder signal groups, one for flashing red and one for flashing yellow. The reason you need to do this is because on the 3D, so the signal head themselves are just going to have, you know, state 1 or state 2, stage 1 or stage 2, right? But on the signal heads, the displays, you can configure those to have those placeholders. So you have the placeholder for flashing red on the top, and then you have the flashing yellow on the bottom. And so by default, those are going to show nothing because the signal controller doesn't know what to do with those. But we add in 2 attribute modifications from the actions menu, attribute modifications. We have one for our flashing red. And so basically you take signal controller 1, signal state 3, which is, if we go back to our signal controller, is this guy right here, our flashing red. So we're going to hijack state 3. And if it pushes out a amber signal or a red amber signal, we're going to push out instead a flashing red signal. And so what we can see here is when I run the simulation, see in 2D mode, the actual signal heads are green and the signal heads are off. So that's another part of the logic is if the signal state is green, instead display it as off, right? So 2 and 8, that's green and off respectively. So if it's green, it's off. Then as we run the simulation, what we'll see is some pedestrians walking up. Take a second for pedestrians to walk up. And they're going to trigger detectors on the approach. When they trigger those detectors, it's going to put in a call. And when that call comes in, these are going to change yellow eventually to the amber state. When they change to amber, this is now being hijacked by the second attribute modification that's saying, okay, if it's showing amber, instead flash amber. So when I hit play, you can see that they're actually flashing. And then as the 2D signal heads are red and the pedestrian phases are green, these are showing a solid red. And then after that, we will have our flashing red show up. So right now, these are showing the red amber state. So that's what the cars are paying attention to, but visually we can see our flashing red. You can do the same thing with like a flashing left turn yellow arrow if you want to visualize the left turn.